Welcome to Same Surgeon, Different Light, Season 6. This is part of the Society of Thoracic Surgeons Surgical Hot Topics podcast series. My name is Sara Pereira, and together with my co-host Sherry Erkman, we will meet cardiothoracic surgeons from across the spectrum of our rich community. We will explore their journeys, the obstacles they've faced in their careers, and the qualities that make each cardiothoracic surgeon distinctive and valued. The opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Society of Thoracic Surgeons.
Same Surgeon, Different Light is brought to you by the Society of Thoracic Surgeons Career Center, where you'll find free access to cardiothoracic surgery jobs, career development tools, and professional guidance. Visit the STS Career Center at careercenter.sts.org.
I'm one of your hosts, Dr. Sara Pereira, and it's a real pleasure to have you with us today for what promises to be a great conversation. I'm also thrilled to be joined today by my co-host for today's episode, Dr. Fatima Wilder. We're very excited for this conversation. Same Surgeon, Different Light is about sharing stories and personal journeys in cardiothoracic surgery. Each episode is a candid conversation that highlights both what we have in common and the different paths that bring us here, touching on themes that resonate no matter where you are in your career. We like to talk about everything from the transition into practice and balancing career life and well-being to the broader conversations about our community and what it means to build a more inclusive specialty. Dr. Wilder, it's really great to share the stage with you today on Same Surgeon, Different Light.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pereira. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to have this conversation with you and our special guest, Dr. Hayanga. And if you'll allow me a minute to introduce him and give us a little bit of background on all the amazing things he's doing. Dr. Hayanga is a professor in cardiothoracic surgery at the West Virginia University. He's the director of the WVU Heart and Vascular Institute ECMO program and the medical director of research. He completed his surgical training at Johns Hopkins University and University of Michigan, followed by cardiothoracic and transplant surgery training at the University of Washington and the University of Pittsburgh, respectively. He served as an Alfred Summer Scholar during his MPH at the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, as a 2008 World Health Organization Patient Safety Scholar, a Department of Health and Human Services Fellow, and Senior Medical Advisor to the Deputy Secretary in Washington, D.C. He is a 2021 Johns Hopkins Leadership Fellow and holds a master's degree in healthcare leadership from Brown University and a certificate in artificial intelligence and business strategy from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Dr. Hayanga is an expert health policy panelist with RAND Corporation, an elected member of the American Association of Thoracic Surgery, and editorial board member for the Journal of Thoracic and Cardiovascular Surgery, the Journal of Heart and Lung Transplantation, and Lung. He is additionally an expert reviewer for numerous journals, including Nature and JAMA. He is a grant-funded researcher and has authored over 200 peer-reviewed papers. His clinical work and research focus on ECMO, transplantation, and the application of data analytics in prevention, diagnosis, and mitigation of end-stage pulmonary disease. He is a fellow of the American College of Surgeons, the Royal College of Surgeons, and the American College of Chest Physicians. So needless to say, Dr. Hayanga is an accomplished and very busy man. So we're happy and appreciative of his time today.
Wow, Dr. Wilder. So I was thinking when I just heard your introduction, how has he fit all that into his very short career being such a young man, but super impressive. What I really was excited about when we planned our podcast was thinking about how many great things I've heard about you, Dr. Hayanga, and I hadn't actually met you until the STS meeting this year in January, where you were being inducted as the new president of the Association of Black Cardiothoracic Surgeons, which was a really lively, great gathering at STS this year. And so the excitement about having you in that new presidential role was really, truly infectious within that entire banquet room.
Yes. Dr. Hayanga, thank you so much for being here. You do have an extremely unique background. In addition to everything I just mentioned, we'd love to hear from you specifically about your family background, your path into transplantation at major top universities, and specifically about your childhood in Kenya. Was becoming a physician and surgeon and researcher something that your parents instilled in you from birth, or did you surprise them? Please share with us how that all started.
First, Dr. Wilder and Dr. Pereira, thank you so much for this very kind invitation and certainly for that very generous introduction. It is a distinct delight to be here. I was born in Nairobi in Kenya, East Africa, and both my parents were lawyers, both attorneys. They met in medical school, in law school, where my mother was the only girl in the class. She was class of 69. She was the first girl to graduate in that law school. And they always joked that she had the choice of all the men in that law school graduating class, and she chose my dad. Now, whether or not that was a good decision or not, I leave that to her. But they were both attorneys, both very driven, both very organized in what they considered to be ambition and structure for their lives. And truly, I think it was my mother who had originally hoped to be a veterinarian who instilled in me this love for this type of science that involves trying to heal other living creatures. And this translated into medicine for her in the urban environment of Nairobi, as opposed to the rural environment which she had grown in. And so I believe that that was her, because my father, if asked, would have preferred that I went into law and took over the law practice, which my sister eventually did. But I truly believe that that would have been his preference. But he wisely did not try to overrule what my mother's wishes were. In fact, on the wall in our kitchen, there was a placard that said, "The views of the husband are not necessarily those of the management." And so he knew the role that he had to play, and I've learned a thing or two about how that translates into marriage. So from an early age, I had it in my head that I was going to study medicine, and really there was no major deviation from that thought.
Dr. Hayanga, that's a great story. Can you tell us when exactly you came to the States, and did your parents stay in Nairobi in their law practices when you came to the States for schooling?
Yes, that's a great question. My parents graduated from law school and went into private practice. They had a private law firm, they worked together. My mother then deviated into finance. She went into microfinance, specifically working with the Women's World Banking. And what that involved was traveling around the world to different parts of Asia, Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, India, to empower women entrepreneurs to begin businesses. So in very many patriarchal societies, like the one from which I hail, women traditionally in the rural areas, even up until the 1990s, did not own land, did not own property, and were not named on title deeds. So often, when they had an entrepreneurial idea, they were unable to go to the bank and get a loan because they had no collateral and they had nothing to demonstrate to the bank that they could really not only pay that loan, but maintain some kind of return on the investment. Those would typically go to men, and men would be the ones who held the titles. Men would be the ones who would interface with the financial institutions. And my mom and her career were geared towards challenging that notion. And so as a young boy, I traveled with her to many different parts of Africa, which was, to me, is something that I realized Africans don't do that often. We don't travel around Africa. So I traveled to a number of different African countries with her, and watched her, and she, within this organization, would go out into rural areas and support women entrepreneurs, farmers, businesswomen, to start their businesses, and they would provide collateral so that these women could go to lending institutions and get loans to start a business that would then really sustain that village and build an ecosystem of interdependence, but also independence that would give families freedom. And my mom would often joke that she would say, if you go into a rural village and you give money to the family, this is what happens. If you give this money to the man of the house, he will go out and buy a radio. But if I give this money to the woman of the house, she will go and educate her children, buy food, and plant seeds to plant a farm and get something that will actually yield fruit beyond what the original gift had been. And so this concept, I later began to understand, was microfinance. And so later in my life, in my 30s, Dr. Yunus, received the Nobel Prize for Economics on the basis of microfinance. And I said to myself, I remember Mama doing that in the 80s. I remember that from a long time ago. So it was a concept that instilled in me the notion that just because the circumstances are designed in a way that makes you think that this is the category in which you should perform, or you should exist, or you should define yourself, that doesn't necessarily define who you are, or that you should abide by those restrictions.
Wow. Wow.
Wow, I really have to ask you the question that I really wanted to ask you when I went off a little was, what were your challenges in moving to the United States? But now I really want to know if your mother ever talked about her greatest challenge. I mean, it's an amazing story. And I mean, she has to be your greatest role model. I can't imagine, right? I mean, she has to be. And so you were really lucky to have this really strong mother that was forging so many new paths. And we have a really large international audience of students and residents always wanting to come to the US. So first, tell us your greatest challenge, and tell us if your mother ever gave you a greatest challenge that she experienced.
That's a great question. I actually plan to ask her that question, because as far as one could tell, she is a very mild-mannered, really soft-spoken woman, but with very, very deep resolve and just a bank of fearlessness, because she went into law school directly from high school, which is the system at home, and was the only girl in a place that would not have been very welcoming of girls, or almost dismissive of girls. And she held her own. And that, to me, has always been an inspiration, because there are oftentimes in any career, and we talk about this in some of the webinars, where we say, you're swimming with sharks. You've got to learn to swim with sharks, because the ocean is full of sharks, whether you like it or not. If you go into the ocean with only a sense of trepidation and a preoccupation of only what you think are your failures and your inabilities to keep afloat or to stay alive, then that is a predisposition towards getting attacked and getting drowned and getting the whole mission rendered futile and useless. And so it's a mindset that you say, well, these are my challenges, and this is what my objective is. So how best can I marry those two things so that even in the context of fear, of anxiety, of restlessness, of uncertainty, you can still draw upon your talents at will, because you have to be able to use those things that are your strengths to balance the things that are your weaknesses. Because if we are preoccupied only with our weaknesses, we miss the opportunity to use the things that will actually keep us afloat our vision, our hearing, our intuition. And I have learned from her that life is often a preoccupation with all the things we're doing wrong, all the things that we didn't get right, all the things that we couldn't have. And instead, shift that focus to what we have today that will allow us to stay in the game and be relevant, rather than a preoccupation with what we can't not do. I have adopted a mindset to concentrate on the things that I can. And this is really part of the subject matter in the book, The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek, where it's not about winning or losing this particular moment. It's about living to fight again. And I think that even though that's somewhat of a combative metaphor, the idea is that we aren't here to play a zero-sum game. My gain is not your loss is not my gain. We can actually coexist and move the chess pieces in a way that we keep playing.
Yeah, that's so much inspiration there and so much to think about, especially in terms of what perspective you use to view your situation. And in light of that, I think it's an obvious advantage to have that type of household, those types of role models, that specific mother, and the opportunity to come and be educated in a different setting where other opportunities became available. And I think you've started doing this already, but if you were specifically speaking to a high school student, a medical student in Kenya who may not have as much control necessarily, or may not feel like they have that much control over their destiny and do not have any necessarily options, let's say, to go elsewhere, but they have an idea, they have a dream, how would you advise them to navigate that path?
Again, that's a very good question. I'm going to tie it in also with the part of Dr. Pereira's question that I didn't completely answer, which is a preparation of what you will find when you leave home. Because somehow when I look back, we did not have a very good emotional preparation of what to expect when you're no longer living under the roof of your parents, and the embrace and the community protections that exist when you live at home. So if I were to go back, it would be to prepare the minds of the potential students or residents, trainees, or young people, young minds who are leaving, to say, you are going to be faced with new challenges from a political standpoint, an emotional standpoint, a financial standpoint, and a strategic standpoint. And understanding those categories will then allow you to categorize your response and to prepare yourself for those challenges. Because right now, the biggest structural hurdle is immigration. That is the single biggest thing. Because there are sponsorship opportunities, there are ways to mitigate the financial burden of moving, but it is not worth anything if you can't get the entry visa to get into the country that you're trying to go to. And as there is a growing sense of country first, nation first politics, there is a reluctance to invest in the outside influx of people, because where it was previously historically felt as an influx of talent, an influx of a workforce, it is now seen as a usurping of resources that belong to somebody else. And with that mentality comes a more guarded sense of who should enter the country and who should not. And one of the things that is one of the biggest disadvantages now in an application is applying as a J1 visa applicant or someone from a foreign medical school. And I know this because coming in from the outside, I realized as an IMG, not only do you have to have the grades, but you really have to have the relationships. You have to find someone who will vouch for you as a return on their investment in you. And I can't underscore that because so many people get so disappointed that they say, well, I studied hard and I scored A's across the board, but nobody is interested in taking my application seriously. And we know that amongst IMGs, the number of interviews is a fraction of what they are for the local or for the native US applicant. And so if you're not ready for disappointment, you're not prepared for disappointment, it can hit hard, particularly with these driven young minds who have been top of their class all through, and suddenly they're stuck sometimes in countries that don't have universities that have medical schools or don't have medical schools that graduate medical graduates, some kind of structural problem that renders them unable to study medicine in that country, or to be able to become a trainee in that country, to become a surgeon or physician in that country, find themselves now locked in this state, this vacuum where they're unable to go to the next level because they are unable to secure the right immigration status. And so preparation in that respect, I think, is something that I was not prepared for. I was pretty naive to what it would take to be in a country where you are an immigrant or an outsider. And not only that, is that you have to prepare to leave the country every year to renew your status. And it was during residency, one of the challenges, to go back to another question that Dr. Pereira asked, whereby every year leaving the country to get the visa to come back, but not knowing how long that process would take, and explaining to your program director that I have to leave, but I don't know when I'll be back, and I don't know if I'll get the visa, and having them have faith that you will be back so that you can participate in the call schedule and the rotation schedule as planned, it was always a leap of faith. So my heart always goes out to people trying to come into the United States to train, because it is not easy. And the path of least resistance is to ignore those applicants, because it is an investment by the institution that the institution often doesn't feel prepared to make.
Yeah, I agree. I always have, in my education roles, prided myself on trying to support IMGs in training, and it's gotten so much harder. Gosh, I could go on with that topic for so long, Dr. Hayanga, as could you and Dr. Wilder. But let's pivot a little bit. I want to hear about some of the great work you're doing in health policy, transplant. Early in your career, you spent a really significant amount of time studying health policy. You did a lot of great work early on in artificial intelligence and machine learning. And now these topics are all that we talk about at our national meeting. And how are we going to keep up in education and training and board certification? So if you look back, say 15, 20 years, did you naturally see all of the work with machine learning coming? And did you think it would take such a prominent role now in our lives in medicine?
That's a great question, Dr. Pereira. And the answer, first and foremost, is no, not in the way that it has unfolded. I mean, early on, the interest in health policy, data science, and what we now call artificial intelligence was driven by this recognition that medicine was becoming increasingly data dense, systems dependent. And so this decision making was no longer individual clinician judgment at the bedside. It was more a distillation of evidence, quantitative, reproducible, scalable. And there is this sense that everything needs to happen faster. Everything needs to be bigger. And so the use of AI and the architectural changes that AI has brought to the table has changed things so quickly: diagnostics, perioperative care, systems management, research. And I don't know that one can predict where this is going, but it is changing just about everything that involves an algorithm in medicine. And so now even surgery, whereby we are using analytics from companies like Intuitive to make these systems more autonomous, because after taking 600 million video clips of how to approach a branch of the pulmonary artery, the computer can then configure its own response to it autonomously by saying, well, this, if the angle of the branch is 60 degrees to the trunk, then it can use a Cartier to lift 2 millimeters and then dissect. And so I think that's where this is going: autonomous, AI-driven, robotic devices that do things that are considered complex. And when I see what robots are doing in jewelry making, we see what robots are doing in spacecraft, you wonder if they can be so precise as down to the micromillimeter and millisecond, then that same delicacy can be applied to biologic tissue. And after that, then the sky's the limit as to what it could do, and the limits to what it cannot do just begin to fall by the wayside.
So along those same lines, looking specifically at end-stage lung disease, end-stage emphysema, LVRS, how are you using data analytics and AI with that group of patients?
So that's another good question, and we are not using AI specifically in end-stage lung disease, but you can imagine that the quantification of emphysematous changes in COPD has evolved, and with the higher resolution imaging and the combination of VQ scan, for example, there is clearly a way that multiple images can be used to either match what is defunctionalized lung parenchyma versus what is not, and in so doing, demarcate clearly which parts of lung parenchyma should be resected in order to allow more functional lung to take its place. So the very concept of lung volume reduction surgery can be based on high resolution algorithms that look at images and VQ scans and tell us exactly where to resect the lung that we believe that does not work. And that can even be matched with pulmonary function tests and other physiologic tests that will allow us to predict that certain resections will result in specific improvements in physiological status. That doesn't exist yet. Right now, what we're doing when we look at the data is still pretty basic, risk-adjusted modeling that really does not use natural language processing or any of the AI models. But that is really just another tool in data analytics. You can imagine that we could also apply AI modeling in the same way to look at large databases like Medicare and come up with the same answers. But more importantly, the use of AI then to actually take us to the next level, because when you look at lung volume reduction surgery versus endobronchial valves, this was just a series of trials in Europe that preceded the FDA approval in 2018 that just iteratively increased the indication of the use of endobronchial valves to target emphysematous lung. First upper lobe, then it was homogeneous disease, not heterogeneous, then it was lower lobe, and really just expanding the criteria for endobronchial valves to include the whole lung, whether or not it had collateral ventilation. And it was a real departure from the rigor of the NET trial, where we almost sort of hamstrung ourselves to upper lobe predominant disease with low exercise potential, and in such a narrow cohort of patients that it limited surgery more than it needed to. And it then allowed the endobronchial valve literature to really run away with the rest of the evidence. But I think that AI is going to be one of the tools that is used not just to analyze data, but to tell us what to do. And ultimately, AI will guide the robots that do it themselves without us.
Wow. So you're saying we have no job security?
No, we certainly, you know the answer to that. They say that, I think that the phrase goes, it's not using AI. AI will not take your job, Dr. Wilder, but if you don't use AI, then you could put yourself at a disadvantage.
That makes sense.
I'm still thinking about the robot being able to find that lung nodule better than all of our great thoracic surgeons that we have out there, to take out the lung nodule and kind of imagine all my early struggles with lung surgery and how amazing that is. So
it's a scary thought, Dr. Pereira, but
it is really, truly very scary. And I haven't done lung surgery in over 10 years. And I remember some of those cases doing VATS lobectomies thinking, where was that nodule? How can I find it? I can't feel it. So boy, that's it's pretty amazing how it's come in the last 5 to 10 years. Dr. Hayanga, we heard about your family of lawyers. We heard about your mother and your sister and all the law practices. And, you've become a really well-respected international leader in transplantation and research. How did you really get involved in the academic science of transplantation? Did you have a mentor that shaped your career into transplant? How did you, we heard you say you formulated your path into medicine, but how did you formulate your plan into this well-respected academic surgeon scientist?
That's very kind. That's a lot of praise there, Dr. Pereira, and I don't know if it's warranted, but I will say this: the path has been a journey, and again, I really go back to the influence and the impact of sponsors and mentors, very much like you have done and are doing with your career, because I have seen a lot of your mentors and a lot of your mentees and a lot of the people that you are helping currently and sponsoring. And the sponsorship is the person advocating for you behind closed doors when you're not there. And so I don't want to miss this opportunity to acknowledge all the work that you do, Dr. Pereira, and also you, Dr. Wilder, because this is a true characteristic of the leadership that you propagate. For me, it was the same thing. I had mentors who I admired and who took me under their wings and who took the opportunity to help me. And I realize now more than ever that it isn't serendipitous. It isn't casual. Mentors are very deliberate. And the more a mentor does for you on reflection, the more time they actually took to prepare what they were doing for you. And I took it for granted that, if someone did something, then it was a spur of the moment, or they just had the time, it was a coincidence. But now you realize that time is so precious and people are so stretched in the multitude of priorities that fill their calendar, that when they show up for you, it is not a coincidence. They are doing it deliberately and with purpose. And so then I reflect on the fact that as a mentor, then that's what's expected. So that there are opportunities that I have had solely because of the mentor, not even because they were my idea. Then there are opportunities that I have obtained because they were my idea, but someone else lifted me along the way. And so the importance of that was that in the course of my training, I had some great mentors many of whom were in transplant, many of whom are not. And it's, we've been, after our setting root in West Virginia and setting up heart transplant and VAD and ECMO, we were stalled at lung transplant because the priorities shifted during the pandemic. And suddenly the resources were turned towards saving people's lives. And the state was concerned that that was where the resources should go. And so this is a battle that we continue to face. Living in an Appalachian state where we have been ravaged by a coal economy that powered the whole country for decades, but now has left in its wake patients with COPD and coal minus pneumoconiosis and interstitial lung disease from fine dust and silica-laden dust that has rendered their lungs non-functional in many respects, but who don't always have the full drop-down menu of options. But part of that process was learning that these patients are important, they matter. And the mentorship that I have had goes beyond just the scientific, but it goes into the notion that we are here to help. And this is part of our responsibility in the profession, is to try to ease the pain and plight of the patients before us. And I'm grateful for the opportunities that I've had where mentors have shown me the human side of what we do, that we are trying our best to give this patient a better chance, and that we may not always get it right, but we have to try to bring our A game every time. We have to try to bring our best and do our best in order that we can settle at night and feel that regardless of the outcome, it was the best that we gave that day. And for me, the mentorship has typically been around the ability to try to be better, less about the outcome. If you do your best, let's see what happens. Just keep doing your best. And in the course of that, it became apparent that you need to have a portfolio and a diversified sense of your talent so that you don't put everything in one basket. You don't concentrate everything into one specific direction, so that you can, in many ways, balance these efforts, so that if you're called upon from a clinical standpoint, then that's good. If you're called upon from an administrative standpoint, well, then that's good too. If you're called upon from a research, an academic standpoint, well, then that's good too. And that in the context of being an academic surgeon, one had to also develop the emotional intelligence to lead a team, to deal with disappointment, to deal with adversity, to deal with rejection, to deal with success, to deal with hardship, and to still keep a sense of balance through those various trials and or victories, so that you treat each, was it George Bernard Shaw, that each is an imposter, success and failure? So you just have to treat each with a sense of measured acceptance, that this is what I got today. I got an A today. Yesterday I got a D, but I'm going to keep trying, and hopefully we can keep these grades up. And I think that that's the best lesson that I've received from my mentors, is that try to develop talents that allow you to be useful in more than one sphere, so that people investing in you get that return on investment.
Wow. I feel like we could write a book with all of this wisdom.
I know, it's amazing. I just want to listen.
Yeah, it's really a treat to be able to hear the thoughts of the leaders in our field. And I wonder, as you reflect on your journey so far, and you think back to the little younger version of JW Awori Hayanga in Kenya, the kid version, and from there to where you are now, is there anything you would have done differently? Any other choices? Was there a fork in the road that you met at one point that you ever wonder, hey, what if I went that way? I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
That's a good question. Always, it's always difficult to look back and know exactly what one should do, or if a decision one made was the correct decision. But I think that the way that I protect myself from the fear that I made a wrong decision is by embracing what happens along the journey. And there have been bad times and there have been good times, but each of those has prepared me for the next thing that happened. And I try to say to myself, well, that thing happened, and what did I learn from it? Because I can't come out of a bad situation and say I learned nothing from it, because then that bad situation could come again and be compounded by my inability to have prepared for it when it had happened to me before. So I think that, it's reasonable to say that if I look back, I want myself to be thoughtful and organized and strategic, and not to take things so seriously that you become entirely derailed by your first failure. And to understand that I have seen people I consider the greatest at XYZ, I've seen them fail. They have told me about their failures. And to think that we are perfect is to set ourselves up for just that, failure, because we can learn from failure and turn it around. So by being able to say, well, if this doesn't work, if I fail at this, then I have a plan B. And if I fail at that, then I have a plan C. It gives us a sense of confidence that actually is likely to make plan A work better than having the anxiety of loading all our hopes and aspirations on this one vessel and spending the entire time so nervous that that's not going to work out. And if that doesn't work out, then it's the end of life. And that is, I think, one of the hardest things that we can do to ourselves as a young person. So I would say, think strategically, be ready to fail, learn from it. It's important to understand the value of relationships, because relationships are interesting. They can actually help you get through situations where objectivity alone would make you fail. And that's, I think, one of the paradoxes that I've learned is that people will bend the rules for you, so to speak. They will say, I ordinarily would have failed you for saying that, but because there's context to what you're telling me, I'm going to give you grace to give me a different answer. And we talk about this when we're preparing students, trainees for the board exams. We say, if you come across as being a terribly mean person, it's going to affect the ability for someone to listen to you and feel that you are a compassionate doctor. So the EQ of it allows me to look back and say, I value what we can do as human beings together. And so I value the relationship building that comes with this career.
Oh, thank you.
Dr. Hayanga, I have so many more questions for you, and we are almost out of time. It makes me so sad. Your last answer just hits home to me in so many ways, and it's always what I try to teach our new graduates on: how do you bounce back from a bad job, or how do you come back and do a cardiac case after a horrible day the last day, right? So I think we all know that our careers in thoracic surgery, transplantation, and cardiac surgery bring us so many tough decisions, mistakes, and failures. So real quick, tell us what your favorite thing to do outside the hospital is to bounce back from the horrible day.
My favorite thing has evolved. My new favorite thing is to try to get my children to belly laugh. So it's not always easy. It's not always easy. And if they see you coming, then it fails immediately. But I try to listen to what they're talking about, and then I try to drop it on them by surprise. So I'll give an example. My son and his friends are always talking about this 6-7 thing. So what I do is I get an opportunity that I say to them, well, you turn it into a lesson. They think it's going to be boring. I say, you need to be able to get up each time you fail, get up and keep going. So if you fail 5 times, you gotta get up 6, 7 times. And they burst out laughing. So I'm like, that's it's I try to get them by listening to what means something to them and playing it back for them, because they think that I can't understand it, and then they get shocked when I play it back.
You're modern. You're a modern dad if you know about
awesome.
6, 7.
And then my kids threw 41 in the mix, and I'm like, okay, this is ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't know about 41. I can only learn so much.
Dr. Hayanga, thank you. I mean, there's so many more questions we would love to ask you. We could talk for hours, but I think out of respect for your time, we'll put that on pause, and maybe we can bring you back another day. But you've shared so much wisdom with us, so many unique perspectives that I think will definitely will keep me thinking, and something that actually, as sort of an early career surgeon, still things that I will use in how I continue to train and mentor other people. So thank you so much for that. Thank you to the STS for support of the Hot Topics podcast series and for Same Surgeon, Different Light. Thank you, Dr. Pereira, for the opportunity to share this microphone with you. And I look forward to keeping the conversation going in the future.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hayanga, for joining our podcast. We really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, and thank you to the STS, Dr. Pereira, Dr. Wilder. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been Same Surgeon, Different Light, a podcast brought to you by the Society of Thoracic Surgeons. Thank you for listening. If you like this podcast, please rate it 5 stars and let your friends, trainees, and colleagues know about it. On social media, you can use the hashtag #TheFaceOfCT Surgery. And for more information about the Society of Thoracic Surgeons, you can go online at sts.org.